Well, many of you that are angry with Donald Trump will be glad to hear that he has made a miscalculation, a bit of an error, and we're going to be talking about that. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. As many of you are probably aware, Donald Trump has been trying to get Vladimir Putin to the table to the peace talks so that Vladimir Putin will end the war between Russia and Ukraine. We know that Vladimir Zelensky will do whatever Donald Trump bids, and Donald Trump has decided that Ukraine will stop fighting on their side, on their part, once the Russians have agreed to a ceasefire or perhaps an armistice. Of course, we know that Donald Trump's primary motive is to get his hands on the raw materials and the critical minerals that Ukraine has to offer, and he has already, in a sense, purchased the rights to those with all of the aid that he has sent to Ukraine. I suppose we have another motive that he wants to be able to say that he brought war to an end. Unfortunately, this is one of those times where Donald Trump is a little bit out of his element. He doesn't quite understand the players at the table, and it seems that many of the people that are sitting around him also do not understand, or perhaps he's not taking that much advice from people who understand and are not, they're not in the room. Of course, let's lay out some of the history that Donald Trump has gone through to try and pressure Vladimir Putin to come to the table. Most recently, they started by attacking Yemen. Of course, it had a dual purpose of getting Yemen to leave the shipping of the oil alone, and it helped to stabilize oil prices. Now, that's important, the stabilization of the oil prices, which I'll get to when we read Donald Trump's statement on the issue. Then he convinced Israel to open up a front against Iran, and the Americans came in and shut the door once and for all, or at least in the short term, on Iran. And don't, as I speak, think to yourself that Iran's just sitting around in the rubble. They are actively pursuing getting back into the conflict. Iran also has a lot of oil, however, and Russia has a lot of oil. But Iran was manufacturing lots of weapons for Russia. And by keeping Iran out of the conflict, even if it's temporarily, Donald Trump felt that he was going to put enough pressure on Vladimir Putin to get him to come to the table and then hammer out a deal. Donald Trump overestimated that. He overplayed that. He got that wrong. Now we come forward a couple of weeks and we find out that even though one of Donald Trump's first arrangements was to have a deal with India, he's now targeting India as a way to keep pressure on the Russian government. And it's still going to end up in the same result. However, let's look at the fact sheet before I go too far afield, and let's just look at some of the things that the American government and Donald Trump are releasing as part of their reasons for adding an additional 25% tariff to the country of India. Before I show you the fact sheet, I want to remind you of a couple of things. I have told everybody from the very beginning that India will take every last drop of oil, every last drop of natural gas, every brick of coal that they can get their hands on. They essentially have the position of, if you can get it here, we will buy it from you. We can talk about how, Canada's infrastructure is not set up for that and how that's a mistake and all of that kind of thing. That's not pertinent to this particular video. However, the demand that India has for those resources I just listed is important. Further, I would remind you that the Americans have already gone to great length to try and get in Iran and Yemen out of the conflict so that they can stabilize the prices of oil, including all of the stuff that the Americans are beginning to get out of the ground and sell onto the open market, including, this benefits a lot of countries that are not really on our side, but stabilization of oil prices all in all allows for a better global economy, and that is one of his motivations. And now we come into this question about putting an additional tariff on India and how he's hoping that this will put pressure on Russia to bring Russia to the table. And remember, if I don't say it again, just remember something. The second that Russia comes to the table, the second that there's an armistice or even a ceasefire, all will be forgiven. Russian oil will flow just like everybody else's, and we will have this harmonious oil product, and the world will begin to develop and become a utopia. Nonetheless, that's not where we are right now. Okay, I'll leave a link in the description. The president found that India is currently importing Russian Federation oil. He already knew that. India and Russia have a long-standing alliance. It's many decades old. All of India's military fleet of airplanes are Russian-made. Accordingly, to address the national emergency stemming from the government of Russia's Federation actions taken against Ukraine, he is imposing an additional 25% tariff on the imports from India, effective August 27th, due to India's indirect or direct importation of Russian Federation oil. Now, some of the other things that are said there are just kind of filler and fluff, and they're diplomatic things because, the Americans are diplomatic in that sense. But if we come into the other one, countering the Russian Federation's threat to U.S. national security and foreign policy, we come down a couple, we can see that it says India's importation of Russian Federation undermines U.S. efforts to counter Russia's harmful activities. China buys all kinds of it as well. So does Germany. Let's not forget that. India's subsequent reselling of this oil on the open market, often at a significant profit, further enables the Russian Federation's economy to fund its aggression. By imposing a 25% tariff, President Trump aims to deter the countries from supporting the Russian Federation economy through oil imports and impose serious economic consequences on the Russian Federation for its ongoing aggressions. Then he goes on to say some other things, which you can read as you like. I'll leave a link in the description. When India came to Donald Trump and said, we will make a trade deal, India was buying Russian Federation oil. When India said we're going to be starting to try to manufacture the chipsets to compete with Taiwan and parts of China, they were buying Russian Federation oil. China, Russian Federation oil. There's a lot of oil, and people that need it. And we can see by the fact that most of Europe still buys Russian oil that once you need it, you need it. It's important. And to take it out of the system will make you basically live in the Stone Ages, which, you can say to yourself, well, many people in the world live without oil. And I'm like, yeah, but they're all dirt poor and they don't have a winter to contend with. That's a different argument. The second part of that sentence, and I'll reread it, India's subsequent reselling of this oil on the open market, often at a significant profit, further enables the Russian Federation's economy to fund its aggression. And now we see the problem. Because by taking Iran out of the conflict, he was hoping that he could stop much of the black market oil that's being sold all over the world. India, Pakistan, they were buying lots of oil from these guys. Unfortunately, that's not the problem, right? The problem is that they were buying it at a discount because of the enormous sanctions that the rest of the world is imposing on Russia. So they say if you buy Russian oil, you got to pay all of these problems. We're putting sanctions. We're going to be blockading harbors, and everything is taboo from Russia. Don't buy it, don't buy it, don't buy it. Russia turns around and says, well, I can get it to you on an unmarked tanker. It'll be flying a flag from somewhere in Africa, and I'll give it to you at $5 less per barrel. That's an enormous amount of money. That's a lot of money that you could then, as you hear Donald Trump accusing India, as reselling it. Of course, I doubt that India is reselling it. What India is reselling is part of the deal they have with Russia. You see, I don't believe that. Here's what I think is happening. Russia is sending them a lot of oil. They're keeping what they need at the price that they have already arranged. And as part of the deal, they're taking the rest of it and selling it on the open market, then taking a commission and giving the rest of the money back to Russia. Now, Russia has a lot of ability to maintain its own economy. And there are parts of the world that we're kind of blacked out with, right? There are parts of where the Russian continent touches the Eurasian plate that we're not really paying attention to. It's not all about Ukraine. You know what I mean? There's a lot of countries along that whole strip of the planet. But because that money's coming in, Donald Trump thinks that that's why he can't get Vladimir Putin to come to the table, because Vladimir Putin's economy is doing just fine, because Vladimir Putin has an internalized economy. He has stuff made here, sold there, and all of that stuff, Russia being very vast, but they have also spread themselves out. So here's where we come to the mistake that Donald Trump is making, the miscalculation or the misjudgment that Donald Trump is making. He's feeling, because he can't get economic pressure by taking Iran, even if it's only temporarily, out of the equation, he can't get Russia to stop making money. That all of a sudden Russia is going to be feeling pressured and cornered, and they're going to come running to the table. They're going to be holding hat in hand, asking Donald Trump's forgiveness, blah, 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 blah. It's a miscalculation because he's thinking that the Russian, and by extension the people of Russia, look at the situation the way a person like Donald Trump or Mark Carney or anybody that's living in the West might look at the situation, and they do not. They absolutely 100% do not consider it the same way. And I'm going to give you some examples, and I'm going to explain to you why Donald Trump can't get Vladimir Putin to come to the table, that he is going about it all wrong. And if Donald Trump would just simply take a small detour in tactic, Vladimir Putin would happily come to the table with big smiles on his face. We have to understand this, we have to understand the history of Russia. And we have to understand that, like I just said, Russia has a lot of attachment to the open plains, connection, like the country itself, the land itself. And it has, in the history of Russia, it has fought the Mongols, the Turks, so many nomadic horsemen, you can't even realize it. They've come in, they've raided, they've pushed them into their walled cities. They have attacked their ships. They've done all of that stuff when Russia was still just a series of principalities. The Byzantines, you have to understand that when the Russians were falling back from the Byzantines and from the Turkic hordes, when the Byzantines fell, that's the reason that Ukraine and Russia have the Orthodox religion. At the time, there wasn't even a written language for their language that had to be taken care of. But that's aside the point. That's not really, the language is beside the point, and the fact that the culture beside the point. The idea that they did not surrender to the Turkic hordes, to the Mongols, to many of the other ebb and flow of history of these armies is something that is significant. But let's leave all that aside. Let's just come forward into the modern time, shall we? Let's think about one time that Russia had its back to the wall and didn't surrender. Napoleon come marching across Europe with the largest standing army in the earth. He's basically destroyed every standing army on the continent. Comes over with 600,000 men, ridiculously sized army for the time. And what does Russia do? They don't surrender. They fall back, they fight, they fall back, and you can ask 100 different people, 100 different reasons. They'll tell you what matters for this conversation is that they didn't give up, even though they were overwhelmingly outnumbered and cornered. Then we can come forward to the conflict with Germany of the 1940s. You can't even imagine. If you don't understand what happened there, I suggest you go out and you read it. But we are talking about a conflict, a situation where they were holding on. If they'd have lost a couple of more blocks of their city, they would have lost access to all of their trains. It would have been a disaster. These guys, you want to talk about meat grinder. Okay, here they are facing up against at the time, the most technologically advanced military on earth, who also had just taken most of Europe. They come driving across Poland with their tanks and all of their stuff. And they push the Russians to near breaking. Did the Russians surrender? Did the Russians come to the table? Did the Russians put up a white flag and say, you know what, maybe we'll just take a pause here? Well, if you don't know the answer to that, allow me to tell you, no, they did not. So when you try to tell when you get Donald Trump trying to put them in the corner, allow me to assure you that the Russian people might not care for Vladimir Putin, and they might even enjoy Donald Trump. The second you tell them that they're in the corner and that they're overpowered and they're outnumbered and now it's all going to come to demise unless they do exactly what they were told, well, if we were in the West, we could just say that the middle finger would be popping up, and they make peace with themselves and they prepare for that. They're not going to back down. That's the point I'm trying to make. They're just simply not going to do it. Because it's not part of the way that they think. It's not part of the way that they have the history of their country. They take great pride in these things, just like we take pride in free speech. Well, many parts of the West takes that kind of pride. There's just no way in the world you're going to get them to run for cover. And so by trying to attack Russia's allies and trying to think that you're going to be pushing them into a corner, all you do is steal their resolve. All you do is make them dig their heels in. People that don't support Vladimir Putin, that are in the Russian Federation, are right now saying, well, I don't care what you say. I don't really like him, but I'll stand my ground, no problem at all. Because that's the mentality. That's the way that the culture is. And now you want to bring into that mix this Ukrainian conflict, which if you're not assured if you don't really understand what we're talking about here, you got to go back to 900 AD. That's when this conflict between Ukraine and Russia kicked off. Oh, yeah, no, we're going to solve that. Let's put pressure on India, and that's going to make that problem go away. Man, you come on. It's just not going to happen. So here we have the situation that we're up against. And of course, if Donald Trump could solve the problem, I could tell you how he could go about it. Unfortunately, that would mean that Ukraine would have to take it in the teeth. And I won't really cover that too much right now. What I want to point to is how here we have Mark Carney at odds with Donald Trump, running to Mexico to try to gang up on Donald Trump, running to France, running to Germany, running to the EU. Now he can turn to India or he can turn to Russia. But excuse me, whoops, no, he cannot. Because the Liberal Party burned any diplomatic situations we might have with India by throwing their lot in with enemies of India, by standing up in the House of Commons and saying some very incendiary things against the leadership of India, sticking our nose into a conflict that, again, is very, very old. We don't understand the subtle nuances. We just know that the Liberal Party decided that they were going to alienate the Indian government. So now we can't sell them oil, and then we can't get them to come to the table with us against Donald Trump. Maybe we can get them to do it with Vladimir Putin. Of course, the problem there is that Canada sends all kinds, billions of dollars we have sent to the Ukraine in an effort to, fight Russians. And on top of that, the only people that the Liberal Party talk more trash about than Donald Trump is Vladimir Putin. I mean, Mark Carney ran up and down all through the campaign until they got a hold of that 51st state stuff. And it was all about Putin this and Putin that. It was all about, we're going to be, inviting Vladimir Zelensky to the NATO summit, and we're going to be inviting him here, and we're going to be inviting him there. I mean, the Liberal Party has been throwing billions of Canadian tax dollars into this fight with Vladimir Putin. So now here we have Mark Carney not able to make a deal with the man who's made a deal with 100 countries. Can't make a deal with one of India right now because, we have no diplomatic position with India. We're not set up to sell them all of the resources that India wants to buy. And Russia, well, come on, I just covered it. So even though he's putting a 25% tariff on India in an effort to pressure Russia, Donald Trump still has more diplomatic leverage, more inroads, more communication ability to those two countries than Mark Carney and the Liberal government does. Imagine in your mind how bad that must be. That he's imposing tariffs, that he's attacking his allies, and he still has a stronger ability to get a hold of them on the phone than Canada does. Or he's putting pressure on India. India's making all kinds of his chipsets. And of course, if you'd read, you would see that there was some exemptions, right? There's a deal that they made recently, and there's exemptions on this tariff. But he still has more leverage, more leeway, and more ability to talk to the government of India than Mark Carney and the Liberal Party does. Mark Carney and the Liberal Party is destroying Canada. They are not able to govern with any finesse. They are not able to diplomatically resolve some of our issues. And as I've said before, and I will say again right now, there is no way in the world that the Liberal Party, who began all of these problems, who started all of these problems for Canada, is going to be able to fix these problems. They started them. If they were going to be able to fix them, they would have saw the problem at the time and they would have fixed it. Here we are a decade later. Most of the people think that we're sitting in boiling water like frogs, and they just don't want to worry about it. He's running up and down the country talking about how he's going to bail out all these companies and that's going to somehow solve the problem. And then when an opportunity presents itself to maybe make a little bit of a diplomatic inroad with countries that are in fact opposed to Donald Trump right now, we have already burned all of those bridges, so we can't capitalize on it at all. And I say once again to those of you that cast your vote the wrong way, you need to think your way through your vote, because we are coming up on some hard times here, guys. Any second, any month now, you're going to see some real issues with our dollar. And that's something that we're going to have to take a good long look at. All right, I'm going to wrap here. I want to thank you for listening. Let me know down in the comments what you think. I'll talk to you next time.